Yeah, sure, of course. So, hi, my name is Ryan Ike, and I am a composer and sound designer, though primarily a composer for video games. I'm 34 years old. I'm based currently out of Seattle, Washington. And I suppose, like, without going through my entire resume, my experience is largely in the indie game space, which feels dumb to even say indie game space because that encompasses a lot of stuff. But I've written music for things like West of Loathing and Where the Water Tastes Like Wine, and a Game of Thrones version of the mobile series Reigns, which is about running a kingdom, and a bunch of other stuff I won't go into. But yeah, that's primarily been my kind of experience with games is in the indie world, and I've been doing that for roughly, oh my God, it's 2020, roughly 10 years now.
I've been writing about this stuff I've been writing about this stuff for 15 years. So, I mean, do you feel old or what is that? Are you just shocked that much time has gone by already?
It's more like right here on this call, I just realized that time moves forward, like for the first time in my life, and it was unpleasant to sort of realize I was like, shit, we'll all die someday, and there's nothing I can do about it. And you get to be here for that, so that's good. That's good. Fun for both of us.
Yeah, hopefully every minute, every question can be like just sadly revelatory for you. That's what I'm trying for. And then
yeah.
You'll find some way to get back at me and also to drag me down. That'll be a fun challenge that we'll have. The questions that I send over to everyone, I mean, they're different questions, but usually, and I don't know if this comes across, like, it's less me asking, like, hey, what's the answer to this question, and more like, hey, what do you think about this question? And so, when I floated over that question about, like, whether games influence culture, I mean, I thought you had like a really interesting response, and maybe it's just by virtue of like the work you do on games, but you pointed to music, and particularly like a resurgence in vinyl, and also like an entirely new market for orchestral musicians. So I mean, like, I understand, what you meant by that, and just as a response to my question, it makes sense. But I was just wondering if, like, could you just start off maybe talking a little bit about like that connection and sort of how video games have created this funnel to sort of, bolster vinyl and then also bolster orchestral musicians?
Yeah, sure. So you had asked me, like, what are some ways that, or first of all, do I feel games influence culture? And I said absolutely. And then what are some ways in which that happens? And as you said, like one of two kind of, ways that I mentioned that are, of course, kind of in the music space, because that's what I know, were especially in game-related spaces, a resurgence in vinyl becoming kind of a medium again, outside of its normal, sort of collector sphere. There's plenty of people who already liked vinyl and still kind of went after it. But so why don't we start with that? And I think what's interesting about it is games provide this sort of anchor point in a way for people who, they love these stories, they love these characters, they love these experiences that they have, and then connected that sort of anchor to, many things that I could name, but vinyl being the one that I kind of went for. Like, people who play games want to have this artifact. They identify with the art of what they play and music and the story and everything, and having this vinyl record gives them this kind of connection to this thing that they loved and they experienced, and gives them this physical artifact that they can display in their house. They can, of course, listen to it if they want to, but, I know a lot of people who grab vinyls of games just to have the thing, right? Just to have it on their shelf. They don't have even a means of, they don't have a record player or a means of playing it. And I think that's interesting because I know people, especially like I have an uncle who collects a lot of vinyl records, not of games. He's not really a player of video games at all, but like he loves collecting vinyls, and he especially loves, getting records of bands that he used to see when he was younger, and like, these kind of physical markings of, related to music specifically, but of these experiences that he had. Of like, I went and saw this concert in like, the 80s, and it was amazing, and like I met these people there, and I still have friends that I chat with who had this experience with me. And like, it's, you know, it's a musical artifact, but it's still just like a physical manifestation of like, this is this awesome experience I had, and now I have this thing I can point to. And, you know, if I really want to dig into it and kind of relive that experience, I can actually take this artifact and put it in a record player and kind of just listen and be taken back to that place. And I think that's a really cool thing that games are giving people, especially like younger generations who maybe don't identify with like, you know, Woodstock or anything of that nature, but suddenly can be like, you know, when I played this game, I was at this place in my life, and it really, you know, this is what this game meant to me at the time. This is how it kind of helped me process what I was dealing with, or helped me escape what I was dealing with, or whatever it is. Or maybe it's even less connected to their life at the time, and it's literally just, I love this experience, I love this story, I loved, you know, getting to be a part of this virtual world for even a little bit. And you know, giving this new generation that same kind of semblance of like, I can have this physical artifact that goes on my shelf, and I can listen to it if I want, and it will take me back to that experience even when I'm not there in that moment, I think is really cool. And, you know, that's one of those things that I think is really interesting about games as a medium, is the fact that they are sort of resurrecting for a newer generation, for a younger generation, like these artifacts like vinyl, and like the other thing that was my example, which is kind of the orchestra hall. You know, it's not a secret that like classical orchestras are struggling and have been for a while, especially now with COVID and everything. But you know, they're struggling to find a younger audience, because as younger generations kind of come to fruition, there's less and less people in those generations going to a concert hall. But a really cool thing that's happened is you're starting to see, you know, in the last like 5-6 years, these concerts being put together of all Zelda music, of all Final Fantasy music, of all Pokemon themes, with usually like a big screen in the background, like actually showing footage from the games at the time, so people can kind of connect what they're hearing to the moment when it happened. And, you know, I've been to a bunch of these, and it's so crazy to see a bunch of, you know, 20-somethings and teenagers and even little kids who like wouldn't have maybe, you know, thought to set foot in an orchestra hall and go listen to Mahler or, you know, Gershwin or whatever, but are totally going to the symphony, like for a fun thing to do. They're showing up in like cosplay and like, you know, dressed like Link and like chocobos and shit. It's amazing to see this entirely different audience than a concert hall has seen, you know, up until recently, like going and experience these amazing musicians doing what they do. And from the flip side too, I've talked to a number of, you know, concert musicians who performed in these, and, you know, even if they don't play games, even if they don't really understand what the game is that they're performing from, they're usually ecstatic too. All the ones I've talked to, them like, I don't fully get what Pokemon is, but this is like insane that we get to play this music that genuinely sounds really good in an orchestra setting, and see so many people excited about it in a way that they don't get excited about, you know, Stravinsky or whatever. And I'm not slagging on classical composers, but because that's what I was brought up on, you know, in my kind of academic upbringing. But it's so cool to see people like cheer and freak out as if they're at a rock show, but they're at the symphony. And that's another thing games have kind of provided, is this, you know, this resurgence in a younger generation, and giving them that anchor point, that thing they relate to, that can help kind of breathe life into something that was on its way out for them.
So, like, when did it, I mean, I tracked these things because I remember, you know, pitching stories on these things, and sort of, you know, when, I mean, that's what I got my undergrad in, is music business, and that was a while ago, and I'm by no means a music industry expert, but, yeah, I mean, like, I saw this being a thing, where, like, vinyl was sort of experiencing, you know, a beginning of a resurgence that I think is continuing, and a lot of it was through like Battletoads soundtracks, you know. So like, but I remember, I don't know. I mean, like, so like, when did this jump beyond it being like those like weird mini CDs you would buy of chip tunes? Like, do you remember if there was like a point where there was a real catalyst where like these vinyl soundtracks started to become like, okay, this isn't a fluke, this is like an actual thing that's happening now?
I mean, it's like anecdotal, right? For me, like what I kind of recall in my experience is, you know, roughly in the last 8 years, I want to say. Like, I couldn't give you a date when it started getting big, but it feels like, 2010-ish, like what we now know is like our current kind of indie scene was really starting to blow up, and you had stuff like Super Meat Boy and Braid and all that were these really cool kind of small form games that people would later come to understand as like what we think of as indie games now. And they were really known for their soundtracks, and people wanted to engage with those. And I feel like, I don't know if it's a symptom of like the indie space being more kind of prone to exploration and trying new things and not being beholden to like a publisher and having to kind of play it safe. But it feels to me like it was, in the last, like, I want to say like 8 years or so, that you would start to see the occasional, like, what if we put this out on cassette? What if we put this out on a vinyl? And that's just become only more prevalent as you start to get these, like, I guess, like stars of indie game music, like Danny Baranowski and Austin Wintry, who are, people who, if you play games, you might, even if you don't really follow like the audio space specifically, you might know those names, or you at least know their soundtracks and go, hell yeah, I gotta have the Journey score. I gotta have Crypt of the Necrodancer. And so, I think as indie games kind of, I guess in my mind, like, I know indie games have been around for like as long as video games have been around.
Right.
So when I say that, I mean what we think of as indie games now. This current kind of world where it's a viable way to make video games that could get seen and could get popular, to me has existed for roughly the last decade-ish. And again, that's super anecdotal. But I think as that world has kind of set in these last 10 years, you start to see people dipping their toe into these new ways of connecting people to these games and these soundtracks as effectively as people are connected to, like, the music of Zelda or Halo or whatever these big AAA games that people love are. I said that like an alien just now, as if I didn't know what Zelda and Halo are. What I mean is, like, people are used to playing these huge blockbuster games, and you think about the soundtrack and maybe the art book, and kind of taking the art and the music and the substance of that game outside of the game itself and wanting to have these artifacts of it. And I think as indie games kind of really started to come into their own in the last decade, you saw people dipping into, in that world, like, ways of exploring that in ways that weren't manifested already. Like, you weren't really seeing a vinyl of any of the Legend of Zelda games, or, a cassette tape of any of the Halo games, or any kind of like fun musical artifacts like that. And I think it took the indie world, which is more prone to that exploration, that experimentation, kind of getting a good foothold and being like, I think there's a market for something weird or something that's kind of a throwback. Mm-hmm. So that's a really long-winded way of saying I feel like my brain feels like it started happening in like the last 8 to 10 years, slowly at first, and now it's like it's super common. Like, people, a thing I see all the time, similar to like devs lamenting about like fans asking when is this coming out on Switch. A thing I see a lot is like, if I'm lucky enough to release a soundtrack people like, or other musician friends release a soundtrack that people are in love with, like, one of the first questions they get is, when is this on vinyl? Like, now it's just kind of expected. But I think it built slowly over the last decade or so.
So, I mean, it's funny because you were talking about like sounding like an alien, or these things that are almost expected. And I don't work on games. I'm a writer, and trying to write about these things is kind of my tool in exploring these things. And so I find it can be kind of hit or miss, like whether people who work in game dev share this sort of interest or this curiosity that I have in like trying to not sound like an alien when talking about this stuff. And I can just remember like trying to pitch stuff years and years ago about like this sort of rise of this vinyl thing. I don't remember like literally the email threads, but I remembered the gist of them, which was just like great skepticism, which I think typically boils down into like, well, that's an interesting story, but that's not for us. Which I guess means like they don't want interesting stories, I guess. But I guess like
we prefer something bland and unrelatable around here. Thank you very much.
So but like, does that kind of like Does it matter, like when you hear about that, like if like these sort of trends aren't being quote unquote translated or explained to people quote unquote outside of video games, like is that any skin off of your nose? Do you think that has any sort of effect, positive or negative, or do you think about this at all, or not really?
I mean, so to make sure I'm understanding, your question is like, does it matter to me if these trends like vinyl resurging and orchestra kind of being connected to games, does it matter to me if these trends are being translated to people outside of video games?
Yeah.
Yeah, it matters to me in that, like, it doesn't bother me when people don't get it, you know?
Oh, I expect them to not get it. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. It doesn't bother me when they don't, unless they're being, like, really derisive and shitty about it, you know, in which case it's like, you know, chill, like, go do your own thing. You don't have to be an asshole just because you don't like or understand. But it does, what's the word I'm looking for? I do care that it be translated outside of the game world, because I think, like, and forgive me if I'm kind of cannibalizing one of the other questions you asked me, but I think that's how games continue to kind of grow as a medium and continue to kind of expand and continue to kind of saturate culture a little further, is by like people who don't normally play video games or aren't really in this world, or maybe are just in a different part of the games world. You know, maybe they only, you know, there's people who like, and no shade, there's people who like buy a console just to play like the new Madden or the new Call of Duty. That's kind of all they do.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, if that brings you joy and you're not being a jerk about it, like, cool, no problem there. But like, I think spreading this awareness of the ways that games are affecting culture and are becoming, you know, / are their own culture, and like the way that's evolving, like the more people who can learn about that, like, I think that's only beneficial to games and to everybody else, because that's how you also might catch the attention of someone who doesn't think they like video games or doesn't think they get anything out of them, and might, you know. And I think that's neat. So I care about it in the way that I think awareness is just always a good thing.
Yeah.
But I'm like you. I also don't expect, like, you know, my grandpa, who again, not here to slag my grandpa, who I love, but like I don't expect him to be like,
right,
to understand that games have soundtracks that get released like movies at all, let alone that, you know, you can buy a vinyl of some work.
Well, yeah,
he digs it, but like he doesn't get it.
And it's totally fine. I mean, you're not really cannibalizing anything, because these are the kinds of things that I'm interested to hear about, and we go on, you know, in any order that it happens to come up. So I take it as kind of a good thing that like these connections are already sort of starting to happen, because I'm not assuming they're necessarily connected, but like this is a thing I think about a lot, and I'm starting to like maybe try to compartmentalize thinking about it, as I've been thinking about it for a long time, and I'm sort of, I don't know quite what figuring out where that's going to take me to or what the point is, but like I guess I've been wondering, like, and you pointed this out too, like part of me is wondering like, well, maybe, you know, I don't know if there is this like utopian state or this like perfect state where like, okay, cool, now there's enough awareness of like all things in games. You know, I think that like, you know, being in the shadows kind of pushes you to do better work, to be better, to work harder. It's sort of like, you know, you don't really appreciate water until you've been in the desert for a while, but you know, I don't know what the water is for games, if I can continue to mangle that metaphor. I mean, it's like, you know, it's like maybe I'm looking at it in the wrong way. Like you were sort of comparing games' influence to movies, music, books, but I mean, there must be uneven ways that those influence culture too, or uneven ways that there are, you know, there's awareness about some things, but not awareness of others. Like, I mean, there's not really a question in there, but that's like a thing that I guess like I've just sort of recently been realizing. It's like it's clear to see where the good can be done for games, but I don't think there's any other medium or discipline where there's like 100% awareness, you know?
Yeah, no, that's true. Like it's weird because I tend to think of when I'm not really digging into it, when I'm just like doing my immediate gut reaction, I'm still one of those people who tends to think of games as like this fledgling upstart that's still trying to prove itself, and still has a bunch of people who say it's not a valid art form, or that it's not.
Right.
It can't be deep, or it can't be this, or it can't be that. And when I'm in those moments, I look at like the other major mediums of art that we all experience every day, like just music or movies or books, like you said. And you can't find a person. I don't know anybody who goes, movies aren't legitimate. Movies can't do this. They can't do that. They might compare them to other mediums and say, I prefer reading, or they might be the kind of person, you occasionally run into somebody who's like, oh, I don't really watch TV. I don't watch movies. I think that person's rare, but you can find them. But like, it's a rarity. And then I tend to look at games and feel like there's still this big contingent of the population that, despite the fact that it's this huge medium, that is becoming more and more ever present, especially in younger generations who've just always grown up with them. It still has so much stuff to prove, but I don't know why. And I'm with you, and I don't know where the water is, essentially. Like, I don't know what to do to rectify that, and I don't know also like if it matters. And that sounds like really crappy and cynical, but like they're not going anywhere. I think that's pretty safe to say at this point. So like, if there's a huge contingent, especially like, not to generalize too much, but in older generations who didn't grow up with these as much, to sort of write them off. Does it matter? Like, they're not in danger. They're not going to stop evolving and stop being art because there may be big swaths of the population that don't care about them or play them or engage with them or understand them.
Yeah.
I guess I don't know. It's sort of contradicting my earlier point of like, I think it's awesome when people who don't understand games very much or don't think about them become aware of them. They might go, oh, cool, they make vinyl with video game soundtracks. Like, I didn't even know they released them, and that kind of thing. Like, finding out more about the industry is neat, and I like when that happens, but I also don't think, I guess what I'm saying is I don't think it hurts at this point in this medium's like evolution. I don't think it hurts games when like people, there's big chunks of the population that don't understand them or care about them, because they're just going to keep what they do at this point.
I think something I've been thinking about, I have no clue what month or day it is anymore. I was going to say, I'll just say recently. Something I've been thinking about recently is I think there's like a way, another thing that's going on here too is like there's kind of this loss or this erosion of this concept of there being a mainstream, so it's like when we're talking about like trying to translate games for other people, it's like, well, who are we talking about? Like, are we talking about like to people who watch CNN, or like, I don't know. It's a weird thing to gauge, but I do think like something I've noticed and tracked is like it's still kind of seen as revelatory. The Animal Crossing stuff is a really good example of like, oh, it's shocking that a video game is having some sort of cultural impact. Whereas you would never see a piece like that about movies or books or TV. It's kind of like it's an understood assumption, right? That these things are going to happen. I don't know. So that's been a thing I've really been thinking about. Like, I guess I'm curious too. Like, I am curious. I'm not. I guess I know I'm curious. Like, are there nuanced or other kind of deeper insights about video games that you really wish people, quote unquote, outside of them did understand? Like, we can attack whether or how that might help things, but maybe there's a thing that you're just so tired of always explaining to people.
Yeah, obviously no one who plays games frequently is going to be surprised by this, but like, games can do so much. Games can do anything on the spectrum of art that movies or books or whatever other medium can do, in my opinion. Like, it does some things better and some things worse. Like, every medium has its strengths. But I think a thing that bothers me is the way that games have been presented in culture for so long, and being such a relatively new medium in the span of like comparing to books and movies and these other things that have been around forever. I think games have been portrayed in a certain way in the last couple of decades of their inception as these shallow kind of Twitch experiences. And I don't think there's anything wrong with playing just like a twitchy action game. Like, I love those. But that's what people think about them who aren't really in the game space, and we haven't had the decades and decades of existing that movies have had and that recorded music has had to kind of shake that off yet, even though I don't think that's a fair distillation of what they are anymore. Those experiences still exist, but it'd be like, I liken it to like, if the only version of a movie trailer you ever saw, no matter what the movie is, whether it's, a big blockbuster action movie or if it's like Little Women or whatever, no matter what the movie was, if every trailer was cut and edited and shot like a Marvel movie trailer. I love Marvel movies, by the way, but like if everything looked like that experience where it's like kind of a fun, shallow sort of popcorn flip kind of thing, I think there would be people who would write off movies a little bit more and be like, well, they only do this one thing and they can't make you feel sad or think about yourself or think about your relation to other people or whatever. And it's like, well, a lot of that's just the way it's being portrayed and shown to you, or just, the way it's being portrayed in popular culture, right? So I feel like there's still this disconnect between the way people who especially don't play games and don't really pay attention to them, like what they see is mainly, little snippets of like Halo and Call of Duty and that kind of thing. And again, I'm not talking smack about those games.
Right.
If you enjoy them, great. But I think like they're not even if they see like clips of something like, games that really made me think about stuff and really made me like feel things, like Nier Automata or The Last of Us, like they're still seeing somebody holding a gun or a sword, and like
right.
there is still that kind of, it looks like just Twitch arcadey combat, and those elements are there for sure, but like they're not. It's hard to distill the way that a interactive medium uses its mechanics to make you feel things when that's what it wants to do. Like use The Last of Us as an example. Like if you just see a commercial of it and you don't really play games, you see a post-apocalyptic game about shooting zombies, and that's probably all you think. And when you're actually playing it, what you're not getting from a simple commercial is the fact that like, hey, this is like desperate. I have like 2 bullets in my gun, and I feel like I'm rich because that's insane for me to have that much. Like I have to be incredibly careful with my resources. It feels bleak and desperate. And when you see other people, your first reaction, because of this hoarding of resources and how hard the combat can be, is both excitement and fear, because you don't know if they're going to try to take what you have. It's just like, it does such a good job of putting you in this bleak, dark world where these 2 main characters kind of only have each other to hold on to. And it tells a lot of that story through mechanics. And there's no way to just put that experience, an interactive experience, in a commercial or a trailer, like not completely, I think. And I think that's one of the issues that we run into is like a movie is meant to be, the same every time you view it. You might have new experiences and new revelations, but the movie's not going to change. And so you can kind of distill that a little bit better in an ad or trailer. I think it's harder to do that with video games. And so people, they only see the surface level if they're not actually sitting down to play it and have that experience. And I don't know how we overcome that.
Yeah,
I don't know if I answered your question either. I think I rambled my way completely off of whatever you asked me initially, so sorry.
No, you're good. I think I mentioned before we pressed record, this is a common occurrence during these. You're fine.
Okay, thank God.
No worries. I think the question was, and maybe I guess you did sort of touch on it. I mean, it was just sort of like, what are sort of nuances about like the reality of, the depth and the complexities of, what kind of games are out there and what sort of ways to think about games are out there that like you wish, people quote unquote outside of video games understood. I mean, it's an interesting question, but then I always struggle on the, well, why should they understand, much less the why should they care?
Right, and again, like, does it, not to sound exclusionary, because that's super not what I want to do, but like, does it matter if they care? Like, I love it when new people find video games that they like. I'm even, right now, I'm having the experience of, it's not her first one, but my wife loves the idea of games. She appreciates them as art. She doesn't look down on them at all, but she doesn't really play them.
Yeah.
And part of the problem she's always said for her is just like, she doesn't really grok to a controller very well. It's just like learning how to actually manipulate this experience physically is difficult.
Sure.
And if you didn't grow up doing that, it makes total sense. But we've been playing, we both love horror, and we've been playing Amnesia together recently. I downloaded that. We've been going through it with her on the controller. And it's been really great to get to experience this thing together, especially with someone who doesn't, it's not her first video game ever, but who doesn't normally play these things. And see her find that. So I do love when that happens, but I agree with you that I struggle with just does it, should I expend all my energy trying to get someone to appreciate this medium when this medium's going to keep finding new people on its own and chugging along and continuing to innovate and change and grow without me doing that?
Right.
I don't know. Is it worth it?
Well, I think where a lot of this kind of thinking or curiosity kind of breaks down is I think it has less to do with the experience of what a game is, and it's somewhere more in the area of well, we're all human beings, and can't we share our lives with each other? But that doesn't really feel like that fits into explaining, that feels a little more hippy-dippy-ish for trying to connect dots on thinking about games or the awareness of games. Yeah, there's not really a question in there. I guess I'm just sort of chewing over what you were saying.
Well, I said a lot because I never stopped talking, so
no, you're good.
Blame you.
That's what these are for. I mean, I wonder how much of this is connected with too. I mean, you said over email it feels like games need to fit into a specific framework to see success, and so obviously part of what the most top easily visible things that get associated with games have something to do with the perception of it. But maybe we can take a sidestep here and you can sort of unpack what you meant by that specific framework. So for games to be successful or to see success, I mean, what is that framework now? And I guess how are you defining success?
Gosh, I mean, it feels like there are certain, first of all, there's certain genre molds. It feels like games still have to largely map themselves into if they want to be really successful. And I wish that wasn't the case. And there's I can point to plenty of games that don't do that and have seen success, but largely it feels like you need to be a shooter or an action game or a platformer. You need to have challenges and likely enemies that need to be overcome.
Right.
And it feels like the games that don't completely do that are the ones where you get people doing this thing that drives me nuts, which is, I mentioned in the email the email correspondence that is a thing that I get so tired of is if someone's hey, check out Eraserhead, check out this weird art movie, and you don't like it, as I kind of didn't like it. You watch it, you don't maybe understand it, and it doesn't completely map onto other movies that you've seen. Usually the reaction is, I didn't like that. The reaction isn't, that's not a movie. You know what I mean? Mm. And it feels like in games, if you make something say, Cart Life, which, if listeners aren't familiar, is a game about kind of running a little food cart and dealing with the struggle of making it and having enough money and food to get by and managing your kind of minimal apartment life outside of your job, or Depression Quest, which is a pretty famous case about a game about dealing with depression.
Right.
That doesn't map onto you are dressed like an anime maid lady and you have a sword and you cut robots in half, or you're in a military shooter or whatever. It doesn't map onto one of the main kind of categories that people associate with games that do well. And when people find those, if they don't like them, they don't just go, it's not for me. They go, that's not a video game. This isn't what video games are. This doesn't count. That's a thing I hear a lot, and it makes me a little crazy. Well, it is a video game though. It's an interactive experience that you're having. You just don't like it.
Right.
And that's okay. It's okay to not like it, but to say it's not part of the medium is a thing that doesn't happen as much. Like nobody reads a book they didn't understand it, didn't enjoy, and goes, "Oh, this wasn't the book."
I mean, what comes to mind is like, and this ties in with something I think I observed a while ago about like video game culture, which is like, you do hear stuff like that, but more in music, and it tends to be like across generational lines, where it's such a stereotype of like, the old man shaking his fist and saying, that's not even music, whatever it is that the kids are into today. But the weird thing about games is like, it's flipped, where it's like older people are pushing for more progressive, different games. Younger people want things to stay the same. And I can't think of another subculture where it's like that, where
so weird, right?
Younger people are more conservative than the older people, and I'm sure there are definitely exceptions, but like on the whole, I mean, you kind of already agreed with me, but like I don't know why that is. I don't know if it's like because people tend to get like hooked with games at a younger age. Is it because they grow up with them? But I mean, you can have other interests when you're young too, but that's the thing that still kind of vexes me, and I don't really think there's an answer or an explanation. I just always find it weird when it's like, one person kind of wound up that way, but a lot of people, how is it that so many people kind of reach that conclusion where it's like, that's the reasonable response to have,
I think that's a really good point. And it's something I think about a lot, and I also desperately wish there was an answer, because that would just help me like sleep at night to understand like why is it when something like, I don't know, Dear Esther or whatever comes out, where it's a game where you just walk around and experience the story. There's not really a challenge. It's interactive, but like barely. You just move around and hear a story narrated to you basically as you move around the virtual space.
Right.
I still very much think that's a game, but the big conversation around it that I'm so tired of that came out when that game came out was like, is this really a video game? Like, does it even count? And so many people were and like you said, so many people my age and younger who have been playing games their whole life were like, this is bullshit. It doesn't count. It's not a video game. And it's like, meanwhile, again, to your point, like I would see people older than me or people who only kind of tangentially really play games at all look at something like that when I show it to them and be like, it's a video game, so what? Like there's no question. Why can't it be this? And it's so interesting and weird that like this seems like the one major medium where it's flipped, like you said, and people get stuck in their ways early and then immediately reject things that don't fit certain molds, and it's like, why?
I mean, does this tie in with the framework for success? Is this part of what's like sort of making it feel a little stuck in that way, or do you feel like even just in the time you've been making games, like has the framework changed at all? Has it wiggled at all?
I think it definitely has. Like more and more we're seeing, I think this always makes you sound like such a snob, because I love AAA games. I play them every day. Like I'm not here to, I want to be very clear. I'm not talking shit about the more structured end of this industry as opposed to indie games. Yeah. But obviously indie games really push, like, we can make a game about depression. We can make a game about sex. We can make a game about, anything we want. And AAA games with, all the machinery behind them and stuff, obviously with a huge publisher, investors and all that, they have to be a little safer. And those are the games that tend to see more wider spread release. So, that's why you see things kind of codified on these structures of like, it's got to be a shooter, it's got to be a racing game, it's got to be something that we have proven in the past works. So, what I think I am seeing even in that space is things kind of sticking to those molds tangentially to get that dissemination, but playing with it. Like, I just finished Control, which was probably one of my favorite AAA games of the last 5 years, which is about, if you haven't played it, this woman who is exploring this government structure called the Federal Bureau of Control that you can only find if you know it's there. Like in the middle of New York, but you can only see it if you're aware you're already looking for it. And it houses all these kind of extra dimensional entities and weird phenomena. And it's just like, it's like every SPC Foundation article, an X-Files episode you've ever seen, like in a video game. And it is a shooter. You know, she gets psychic powers, and she's got like kind of a freaky, transforming, you know, extra-dimensional gun. But it's a game that like deals with these like weird fiction concepts that I've never seen a AAA game do before. It, like, asks more questions than it answers, and has some of the coolest, kind of most otherworldly visuals that I've ever seen, and just does all this experimentation with its storytelling and its narrative and its concepts within the boundaries of like this the third-person shooter. Third-person shooters sell, and people understand what they are, so this is what this is. But like in that framework, it's still exploring things, and that's what I think I'm seeing start to happen. It's like, especially like AAA games will find a way to map something explorative and interesting and new onto one of these frameworks for now. And like, hopefully that will lead to just more games that, you know, more major like AAA releases that don't have to map onto a framework at all that's already sold. But that's what I'm saying for now. It's like, if this is kind of a racing game or a shooter or, you know, whatever major genre that sells, but like if they find a cool, interesting spin on it that hasn't been done before. And it almost sometimes feels like this is a shooter because that's what'll get it out there, but what you really care about is the new stuff you're doing within that framework.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just coming off of finally having time to play Death Stranding, which I guess I just finished at like 2 a.m. one night last week.
Oh my gosh!
And my head was just kind of swimming with a lot of the sort of stuff you were talking about, just sort of kind of marveling at, like, you know, I just like I'm explaining it to people I know who haven't played it or don't really know much about games, and I just keep saying like, well, it really has no reason or right to exist. But I'm kind of so glad it does, and it's very bizarre, but at the same time it does manage to kind of it does make allowances for kind of ticking the kind of boxes you're talking about, where it seems like it's going to be X, but it's actually, you know, A and B and Z. And so I guess like a question that connects is like, and I think this ties in with what we were talking about anyway, which is sort of like, well, how can people who don't pay attention to games maybe necessarily connect with them more? And you said one way they can do it is to sort of question and examine tropes and genres. So, I mean, are there tropes or genres you'd like to see be pushed or challenged? Or I'm not telling you to like pitch me game ideas you might have or might want to work on, but are there things you notice and maybe you think, well, somebody else maybe is better to sort of push against this?
Yeah, I mean, I'd like to see more. I'm sorry that this whole call I keep kind of comparing games to film, but just so we have
You're fine.
A comparative point outside of games that I can refer to. So I think I'd like to see more games, especially in like the AAA world, where I know there's so much more money behind it and it's very risk averse. Explore like things like, you know, the equivalent to games of like an art house film or a bottle episode of a TV show, you know, where it's like everything is in this one space, and the interest comes from like exploring like minute kind of character detail or the way that single space changes. Like, you know, we expect games to always be, especially in the AAA world, but like be this big, sprawling, explorative, you know, experience where like you're constantly seeing new things and doing new things. And I'd like to see subtlety, I guess, explored a little bit more. And I'm definitely not saying there aren't tons of games that do that, but I think that's the thing that like, I love me a dumb ass Marvel movie. Like, I unapologetically love those movies so much, and anybody who's sick of them, I get it, but like that is exactly my shit. But for people who aren't like me and don't want like a big, stupid, over the top experience, like a movie, you know, that's about subtlety, and that's about conversation, and that's about, you know, reading kind of just an actor's face for very slight cues about what their character's thinking and feeling. Like, I know people who like that is what they like, and that's what they go for. And I feel like games don't completely do that as a whole. There's definitely always exceptions, but I think that's my big thing. It's like, we have the big bombastic over the top shit like down. I'd like to see like subtlety become more of a tool that gets used throughout throughout an entire experience, because I think that would start drawing people in. Like you play something like I think Journey is a good example of that, where that game doesn't even tell you you're playing with another living human being until you figure it out. Like if you're playing that for the first time and you don't already know the deal, which everybody in video games who's even heard of Journey now knows. But like if you show it to someone new for the first time to try this, that moment of realizing like, oh, the game didn't even tell me that's another human being. I figured it out. You're going to have a really cool, amazing kind of moment there for a second. And I think that's something that we don't explore enough as a medium, and I would like to see kind of happen more often.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I think this is sort of a subset of what you're talking about. Something I've always noticed is like how often in kind of bigger budget games, like they spend all this effort, making these huge worlds, but they often feel very sterile. Like they very rarely feel like environments that have been like lived in, or like they're not like dirty. It's hard to explain. Like they just feel sterile. Totally. They feel sterile in the way where it kind of breaks things. But like I know from other people I've interviewed for this who like have written on some of those games, like there's this weird tension where like they spend a ton of money on these games, but then it's like there almost isn't allowances or room for subtlety, where like they feel like the people playing them are idiots, and they almost have to like put bumpers in for bumper bowling to like make sure people notice the things that they're supposed to notice and go where they're supposed to go and not feel lost and not feel frustrated and not want to quit. And so when you're like pulling people, along a specific funnel, it's like, yeah, that's one of the things that gets sacrificed is like subtlety and like smaller moments, or just like trusting players to find stuff. And it doesn't have to be like Easter egg stuff, but like experiential stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Like I think a good example of kind of doing this right and incorrectly that I played in the last year was Red Dead Redemption 2, which I thought was pretty okay. I love a Western. I liked it overall. I'm at a stage in my life where I don't have time for a 4 billion hour game, so I skipped a lot of it and did kind of the main story stuff. But like that game got pretty famous for a lot of things, like nasty crunch culture and all that aside, because I could go on forever about that. Like the level of detail that they put in, where you can just track an animal and follow it around, and it will kind of live a realistic little ferret life that you've just observed, or the thing that made a lot of headway in the media that was like, oh, when you take your horse to a cold environment, like its balls shrink, and it's like, okay, I guess, but
awesome.
I don't. Great, and it's like that's fine. You did put that detail in, but that to me that didn't add anything to the game. It was like, okay, you have a lot of detail,
right?
Environments do look lived in, and that is helpful. But what I liked was the main character Arthur. Like that was an example of the kind of subtlety that I'm into, where like I didn't like him at first, and over the course of the game, he became like one of my more favorite kind of protagonists in a good while, because he was written and acted and filmed super subtly in a way where like he would. I don't want to give away any spoilers if people haven't played it, but like something really bad would happen to him in a private moment, and then he would hide it in these subtle little ways from the other members of his gang to kind of spare them the grief of it. Or he would have these moments where like he's a big stupid idiot and he's not the smartest guy, and they would find a way to craft his language and the way he interacted with people and make that endearing instead of just making him like a big dumb oaf trope. Like they made him a complex feeling human being through subtle actions, including the available actions to you as a player, like the choices that you can make. It wasn't just like in cutscenes. Yeah. It's hard for me to kind of fully explain that, but I really like that kind of thing, and I'd like to see more games do that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think like this has been a thing too that's like palpably changed, and I think is parallel to like the rise of the vinyl and the orchestral performers that you were talking about. Is I think like at the beginning of that trend, like I think there was this strong feeling that AAA games are kind of all homogenous, and there is a degree I think to which that's true, but there are these like smaller points you can indicate towards. I still haven't had time to play Red Dead 2, but like in the way that you're talking about, or like in Death Stranding, or I mean, like it does seem like there's an awareness of that, sameness, and that there is a push towards it. And I think what's refreshing about that is like hopefully it'll kind of lessen this attitude of like, people with smaller budgets or indies or whoever. I mean, I would just really like to see an erosion of that, where it's expected that the people who have the least money are expected to take the biggest risks. I wish that those bigger games would take bigger risks, but maybe it's just not pragmatic to hope for that.
Yeah, I'm 100% with you on that, and I am hopeful, because I think we very slowly we are seeing it more and more. We're like, I don't like to generalize. I'm sure there's investors and people on the finance side of big, AAA video games that actually care about how the game is made and care about it being a good piece of art. But I think on the whole, there's a big disconnect between like the people who fund things and need to see their bottom line and the people who want to make an experience. And I think more and more we're seeing, especially in that big AAA world, like the people who are actually making the experience, finding ways to still experiment within the boundaries of both the genre they might have to make a game in for it to sell, and the whatever their publisher overlords are dictating that they have to include. I think more and more we're seeing things like Arthur Morgan and things like the ending to I won't spoil it, but the original The Last of Us, which is still a shooter throughout, like that game had an ending that I thought like really trusted players in a way that I hadn't seen in a AAA game up until then, where it was like, oh, this is subtle and complicated, and it makes the characters, like especially the main character, like incredibly flawed, that you ended it this way, and like it kicked ass, and I absolutely loved it. And it was partially because it was still a big AAA shooter with all this machinery and investment in it that needed to be kind of satiated, but it still did this really like complex emotional ending that had to trust players in a way I hadn't seen games do before. It didn't just feed it to you and say, this is what happens. I think we're seeing that push from the creative side of AAA games more and more, and I think as that continues to happen, we'll see more and more of these experiences be held up as like, this rule is because of this subtle thing they did, or because of this different thing they did, and hopefully that will continue to change attitudes on the whole, as far as like what people who are investing in games and financing games, what they think players want versus
right.
Maybe they'll start to realize what they actually.
Right, that was another game I finally had time to play as well, just before all the pandemic and everything hit. Was The Last of Us, and so. I think just looking at it, in hindsight, from a decade perspective, like there's definitely more examples of the kind of growth that we've been hoping for and talking about, like from 2010 to 2020, as opposed to 2000 to 2010. And I think that that's part of like, when we're talking about such fuzzy, abstract things like, video games or genres or ambition. I think that's really what kind of inroads look like. Is like there are a couple more examples to point to, and it's just a reminder, like, yeah, we're still kind of in the early days of this, even though it doesn't feel like it because it's so technologically intensive, and there are a lot of like cool things being done with it, but it's still like we're still at the cave drawing phase. So I think I have one more question for you, is there something else you wanted to bring up that you just didn't get a chance to?
No, I feel good. I think I just want to use this moment to say, like, I completely agree with that. I think that's what gives me hope about that idea of there being more subtlety and more experimentation in games, is that, like, it definitely does seem like a trend when you look back to the beginning of the millennium to now. And you're right, it's just kind of hard to see it happening while you're inside it. But I think that it gives me a lot of optimism for this continuing. I just wish it wasn't so freaking slow, but what are you going to do?
These things are slowest to the people who see them and want them. I've just come to accept.
Yeah.
But in the rear view, it seems fast because we're locked inside, and there's every day is the same day now. So let me abstract out to that. Hopefully, we can stay on to that hopeful thing, or maybe not. However you want to go with it. This is just kind of last question I ask everybody. What do you think video games have accomplished?
I mean, I think they've. Oh my God, David.
Yeah.
Saving the big guns for the end there. I mean, they've accomplished a lot. I will try to latch on to maybe rather than try to list everything. I think one of the most major things that I see that I really like that they've accomplished is they've given so many people a space. They've given so many people like a place where they can feel connected and where they can feel like they are being catered to and spoken to in a way that I don't think I've seen a medium do. Like Animal Crossing is the big current example, obviously, but like I can think of so many people I know who play video games even a little bit and can point to something and they went, this game made me feel understood and it made me feel welcome, or it just was a comforting factor in a hard time. You know, it gave me exactly what I needed in that moment, whether that's Breath of the Wild or, you know, Cave Story or Animal Crossing or whatever. I think everybody I know who plays games has that one thing where it's like, you know, I talk to a lot of people about this actually. And like, I have, you know, many like favorite movies. I have many favorites, albums and books, and they've all given me comfort or made me feel understood in certain ways. But I think because of the nature of games being interactive, like almost everybody I know who plays games has at least one, if not many, where it's like, this felt like it was talking directly to me. This felt like it was made for me because, and I think part of that is because of the nature of games being interactive, you get to make choices. You know, no matter how on rails or not they are, like you feel like you're having agency in this experience that can feel like it was crafted for you specifically, even if many, many people enjoy it. And I think that's a really special thing, that it's making a lot of people feel heard. And, you know, I hear this story repeated over and over again in my circles of like, this game got me through this difficult period I don't think I would have gotten through, or made me feel understood and welcomed when I didn't feel that way in my, you know, my personal life. And I think that's really special. And I know all mediums kind of do that, but I don't think it's the same because of the interactivity kind of inherent and the agency that you have when you're experiencing that connection.